The 1919 to 1920 NHL season had 4 teams that played 24 games each, so there wasn't a ton of hockey to be watched. There was, however, a ton of goals to be seen, including Joe Malone's record-setting 7-goal game. Joe Malone began his professional hockey career in 1909 playing for Quebec in the Eastern Canada Hockey Association. They eventually moved to the National Hockey Association, and in 1917 the NHA folded and gave way to the new league in town, the NHL. So why does this matter? It doesn't. It's important to remember that nothing really does. But in the context of Joe Malone's career, his nearly 10 years of pro hockey before joining the NHL is a significant footnote. At the time, competing leagues were seen as equals. The Stanley Cup itself pitted the NHL against a rival league between 1918 and 1926. So when Malone joined the NHL, it was safe to say that he was experienced. And he used that experience to nab several records regarding a player's first NHL season. Records that still stand today. In fact, on the first day of the NHL's inaugural season, both he and Harry Hyland set a record for the most goals in an NHL debut, with 5 apiece in their respective games. 100 years later, no one has ever scored 5 goals in their first NHL game, but both Malone and Hyland had been pros for years before, which makes Austin Matthews' modern-era record of 4 goals in an NHL debut all that more impressive, having done it as a true rookie in 2016. But the record we're here to talk about came in 1920, during the NHL's 3rd season. On January 31st, Joe Malone scored 7 goals as his Quebec Bulldogs defeated the Toronto St. Patricks. 7 goals? That must have been a blowout. Not quite. The Bulldogs were holding onto a 1-goal lead in the 3rd before Malone, unsatisfied with his 4 goals at the time, strapped on his goal-scoring rocket boosters and put up a natural hat trick in the final period, securing a 10-6 win for the Bulldogs. And yes, there were in fact goalies in both nets this game, but in those days goals were just flat out easier to come by. The man in the opposing net for Malone's 7-goal game was Ivan Mitchell, or as he was sometimes known, Mike, because why not? Mike's goals against average that season was 4.34. Compare that to the worst GAA in the 2017-2018 season, or the worst GAA in the last 10 years. And if you think Mitchell was trash, take a look at Malone's own goalie, Frank Brophy, whose 7.11 goals against average makes me feel like I'd have a career in goaltending in those days. But I wouldn't. I'd probably be scooping up horse shit for a living. So despite Malone's incredible ability to put the puck in the net, the Bulldogs finished the season with a 4-20 record. His team needed him to score like a machine to win, which he did like none other. Not only has no one else ever scored 7 goals in a game, but there are only 7 players that have scored 6 goals in a game, one of which is also Malone. And it hasn't been done since Darryl Sittler did it as a Maple Leaf in 1976. On top of the 7 and 6 goal outings, Malone has 3 games with 5 goals. The only other players to net 5 goals in a game more than twice are Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, who both did it 4 times. But it was a different era. You can't compare Joe Malone to players like Gretzky. Sure I can. And to further it, I think Joe Malone was more attractive than Wayne Gretzky, because clearly that's just a black and white photo of George Clooney. But what does this all mean? Well, it means that it was a much different game in those days. There were no zones, no forward passing, and the games had scores that resembled baseball games on HGH day. It was also 20 years before the era of the original 6. Most stat lines from this time period are either forgotten or disregarded in comparison to modern era stats. Even Joe Malone's 7-goal game is not a widely discussed mark nearly a century later. But when and if his record is ever broken, the player who breaks it will deserve a damn trophy named after him. Or a firm handshake, I don't know. The dude could be an asshole. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. If you can break this record yourself, I will personally sign your skateboard.